some years ago, there was a president in this country, Mr. President, and I won't want to mention the name, but Mr. President knows some of these things. He had a man around him that was so powerful and had his ear. He had lunch and dinner with him almost every day. And he was so powerful that he wrote letters in the name of the president as he pleased to fire people and made it difficult for the president to govern. It was like you had two presidents. And one day I called the president and he picked up the phone of the president. And I said, Mr. President, he said, this is not Mr. President. He mentioned his name and he said, what is it? I said, I need to speak to him. He said, he's very busy. He can't talk to you now. Tell him to call you. Mr. President never called me, so I stopped worrying myself. I said, if you...
So now the chickens, okay, are basically coming home to roast. TNE. The chickens are finally coming home to roast. Bishop Duncan Williams is going after the ex-president Akufo-Addo and his failed legacy and even how he destroyed Ghana before he left it. Now, we understand that Ghana was somehow not good when he took over. But Akufo-Addo was doing it well up until the second tenure, and he himself, Okumfo, destroyed everything. There's a full video call share. If you don't get the context, just yesterday, the President of the Republic of Ghana met with the clergy. Now, one of the things that John Dramani Mahama and I established in this administration is that periodically, he is going to meet with the clergy, software in penny for more country. Now, I because basically, I want to share Bagana and I want to share Koswa. Baby, a sentiment nifi sorry. If the church leaders can convey this message to the president directly, then it's a first step to understand the people and getting the problem solved. When yesterday, President John Dramani Mahama, he met the clergy. Now, meeting clergy, one of the people will take a podium to speak was this same man who was on the National Cathedral Board, whom he resigned later on, Bishop Duncan Williams. Now, Bishop Duncan Williams, when he took the podium, he said something. It's here for Ekuti Nura. Nura in this case, Gabby Otchere Darko. Listen, there's a full video, but I want you to understand it or get the context because he didn't mention him, but we will say Gabby Otchere Darko. Now, according to the message of preaching, it was directed with a two-edged sword. Baku Ekwama ex-president Akufo-Addo and Baku so Ekwama the Otinim John Dramani Mahama because power no. You can become power drunk, which means say power ne bit me the deal. I'm a trimmer there before I realize no. Adia wo ya office no. Now say unim. Now say before I realize now term now what sell legacy. So this is what Archbishop Duncan Williams or kind or part say emra na Ghana near man koyi. National Cathedral, a whole lot of things, corruption scandals, no. No person convey this message. No, they try convey this message. They ex-president Akufo-Addo because all the matter board so in a co-program you see on the so my main country say see a chronometer head my main country say see no National Cathedral projects no issues be where I was here solve it and then he called because now try to contact President Onya so one day he called the office of free office no who picked up Gabby Otchere Darko. Now Gabby Otchere Darko pick it up no. And also Obisa Archbishop Duncan Williams said that and also a person the president cast and also president Niho if there's anything young convey Emma or no Gabby Otchere Darko. And also okay. Say but the president in your time on friend obe teach him. And also okay what Obeka che president no bibi nya your friend your friend bium. So basically no also to also say this particular man was so powerful say otimi throw letter fire and crofo. Gabby Otchere Darko to me throw letter me pay WhatsApp nya fire the same Gabby Otchere Darko to me eka say you be appoint say nkwasia niema and before I realize the MPP party have been sold out even in the own MPP Perifo they are complaining about Gabby Otchere Darko and Prez Mahama say Mahama don't be like him. You can share the full video of it because my church when we come back we continue.
To mention the name, but Mr. President knows some of these things. He had a man around him that was so powerful and had his ear. He had lunch and dinner with him almost every day. And he was so powerful that he wrote letters in the name of the president as he pleased to fire people and made it difficult for the president to govern. it was like you had two presidents. And one day I called the president and he picked up the phone of the president. And I said, Mr. President, he said, this is not Mr. President. He mentioned his name and he said, what is it? I said, I need to speak to him. He said, he's very busy. He can't talk to you now. Tell him to call you. Mr. President never called me, so I stopped worrying myself. I said, if he doesn't call, I won't bother myself. So I left it alone. And he was so powerful that when the president takes decision, he will go see the president and change it. To the point that people stop seeing the president and they go to him because they realize that whatever decision the president takes, this individual could change it. So it's better to see him and let him prevail on the president. I pray that, Mr. President, in your term as president, that there will be only one president and it will be you. That there will be no other president and no other power or voice in the shadows. But that you will be the only president, and that your word and your decision shall be honored and respected, domestic and external, as only one president chosen for this republic. Please put your hands together and thank God for that. He was, ladies and gentlemen, he was so feared and so powerful that nobody could touch or come between him and the president. One day, he fell out with the president. Something happened, I won't go into details. And he and the president were no more friends and tight anymore. Then suddenly, he called me. And he wanted me to intervene. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I can't do it because at the time when you had power and influence and access and the ear of the president, you undermine some of us. And so it's difficult to intervene in this matter, but I'll pray for you. And my prayer simply was this: Father, let him reap what he has sown. But I didn't pray that prayer openly. I prayed it secretly. The Bible said in 1 Corinthians 4:7 that who maketh thee to differ from another? Who distinguishes you from others? Who have made you better and different from your brethren and from others? I have 43 brothers and sisters. I have 37 from my father and 6 from my mother. And I realized that God picked me out from among them, not because I was any better than anybody, or I had anything to offer that they didn't have. Some of them have been to better schools than I did, without much education, and they're so brilliant individuals, so blessed in their own ways. But God chose me for one reason, because God knew that if he didn't show me mercy, that I would be nothing, that I was going nowhere without the act of mercy. So God looked down upon me and said, I will show you mercy, and to see if you will show others mercy. Mr. President, God has shown you mercy. Knowing your family, your father was not a president, your grandfather was not a president, but God has made you a president. You have broken a generational curse. You have become a curse breaker. You've paid the way that one day, depending on how well you govern the people of this country, you've made it possible for somebody in your bloodline to emerge one day as a possibility president of this country. And to every minister, and to all of you that sit in the Council of State, whatever position you hold, your father was not a minister. Neither was your grandfather a minister or a member of Council of State or member of cabinet. But God has given you opportunity to be one, to make a difference. How you will be remembered by history, and whether you will rise up on the right side of victory or on the left side of victory, whether history will treat you fairly or unfairly, has everything to do with how you handle the power and the influence and the opportunity given to you right now to serve with Mr. President. Forget not. We tend to forget That once upon a time, like the Bible says in Deuteronomy 5:15, that once upon a time you were a slave. God said to the children of Israel, remember that once upon a time you were slaves. Means you were disadvantaged. You were under governance. You were in bondage, in prison. You had no right to speak. Your privileges and your rights was denied you. You had no sense of creativity or productivity. You worked for nothing until I stepped in after 430 years and gave you freedom and fed you with the food from heaven, even the angels' manna, and led you through the wilderness of Sinai for 40 years. And God said, remember that once upon a time you were a slave. So today, if you are favored, today if you are blessed, today if you have access, today if you have influence, take heed how you treat others who don't have it. Be careful how you manage others and you treat others. And as I've always said, let your president's attitude and that of the First Lady Lodina be your example. For these are people who are very, as I said, consistent and current, authentic. They are who they are, whether they are in opposition or in government. Down to earth people. I want to say something in conclusion. Once upon a time, President Mandela called his protocol and by any of the restaurants in the area. And he said, Mr. President, you can't do that. You cannot do that. We have to first of all go sweep the place, check the place and everything. And he said, all of you leave me alone with your protocols and security. So he said, let's go. So they left. They went to this restaurant in the area. So he sat down, ordered his food. Whilst they were eating, he lifted up his eyes, ladies and gentlemen, and he saw this gentleman sitting opposite where he was sitting, having his meal. And he said to protocol, please invite that man to join us to eat. And they said, you can't do that, Mr. President. It's very dangerous. You have to let us do our job. And he said, thank you for doing your job, but let him come. So the gentleman came, sat with Mr. President, and they ate. But during the time of eating, he was very nervous. Very, very nervous throughout. And after they finished eating, Mr. President said, have a good day. Thanks for joining me to have a meal. And he left him. When he came out, he said to his protocol and the security and said to them, why do you think the man was so nervous and shaking whilst we were eating? He said, Mr. President, it's because of who you are. You're a very powerful person, very powerful president in Africa, all over. Everybody fears you. He said, no, that's not the reason. He said, I'll tell you why. He said, when I was in prison, under the dominance of apartheid, subjected to injustice, he said, whenever I was beaten and mishandled and mistreated, this was one of the men who would stand on a chair when I cry for water, and he would pee over my head and ask me to drink it. And they said, what are you going to do about him? And he said, nothing. Nothing. I'm not doing anything. I'm not giving power to settle scores. I'm not giving power to punish my enemies. I have power to deal with those who have wronged country and who have done wrong. Those who have used position given to them to amount wealth for themselves and for their immediate family at the expense of the sufferings of citizens. But I'm not giving power to punish people who didn't like me and who hated me. In conclusion, Psalm 44, verse 3. Psalm 44, verse 3.
They did not conquer the land with their swords. It was not their own strong arm that gave them victory. It was your right hand and strong arm and the blinding light from your face that helped them, for you loved them.
Mr. President, it's clear here that the victory you won in this election, and looking at the history of this nation since the Fourth Republic, that God showed you great mercy and favor. that this election in the history of our country, there was such fierce tension, a sense of uncertainty, and a feeling of powerlessness and hopelessness and perplexity was all across the land and the nation. So many were worried about the outcome of the election and what could happen. And this election was not won, as you know, Mr. President, by skill, by sword, or by the intelligence of your men and women on the field. But this election, as you know yourself, because I saw some of the actions you took and things you did. Some of you didn't know this. He was fasting for weeks and fasting for days, seeking God, and will not eat, and was traveling with a weak body across the nation. And sometimes I was very worried whether he was going to make it with the fasting, without eating and doing what he was doing. And I think you alone know the steps you took and how you had to engage the Most High in different times of the night, 1 a.m., 12 a.m., and putting yourself in harm's way to seek God Almighty's intervention. Today, as we gather here, I want to thank you that you allowed yourself and your staff to gather all of us to make a statement that you do not take for granted the God factor of the governance of nations. For it is written, by might nor by power. And the word might here means military force. Power here means capabilities or audacity or skills or intellectual capabilities or logic or philosophy. It is not by any of this. And that is how come with all the wealth of Africa, we are still impoverished and we have the best, like our minister said, that can turn this economy around. But the problem of our country is spiritual and not economic and not political. It is spiritual. But it is my prayer and my desire, Mr. President, that in your lifetime, that we all will see such a transformation of our economy that none of our children, no Ghanaian son or daughter, will queue at any foreign embassy for visa in order to go to any country for greener pastures. And that all our sons and daughters scattered across the West shall find their way back home to help build a better Ghana and an economy where all Ghanaians can be proud of. May God grant us this desire of all of our heart, that in your lifetime, every minister of state will maintain the common touch and be an example like you are to so many. I rest my word here, and I'm told we have to pray for Mr. President. Is that correct? Okay, bring the chair. And I want the men of God, Apostle Nyamiche, and I want Apostle, please come, Reverend Mama Makwe, please join us. Prophet Owusu Bemba, please come join us. We want to stand. We've been sitting for a while. It's very difficult to be a president. And this president means well, but there are mountains he must climb, and there are valleys he must cross, and there are hills he must capture, and there are crooked paths that must be made straight if he will succeed. As president, he deals with the good, the bad, and the ugly. So much distractions, expectations, and demands of him, home and abroad and from everywhere. Everyone wants his attention. But I want to pray for Mr. President. I want to pray for him. that the hand of Adonai, Atula Kusa.